I'm Erin Lawler-Patterson, the Goodness Chick. I'm a podcaster, motivational speaker, author, counselor, and proud part of the Mental Health News Radio Network. Join me on the journey of navigating the joys and pitfalls of life, addressing mental health, addiction, raising kids, and giving back. If it takes a village, then join me as one of those villagers. Villagers wanted. I love going with natural products, big time. I jumped on with Rocky Mountain Oils as an affiliate, I guess a little bit over a year ago. Been using essential oils for a number of years now. Super duper amazing stuff, from lavender that I keep with me at all times for relaxation, to peppermint if I have a headache or a stomach ache, using with coconut oil. Literally, there's just a myriad of uses to use them in all aspects of your life. If it's something you're interested in, I encourage you to hop on Goodness Chick storefront, check it out. It is good stuff, my friends.
All right, so very excited today. Today's episode, on the heels of April being Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month, which is a big one, something we should be dialoguing about, need to be dialoguing about, can absolutely make people uncomfortable. And kind of the goal here is to become more comfortable talking about an issue that affects so many people, what this looks like, the support involved. And today, our guest is Ashley Bendiksen. Ashley, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, excited that you're here. You are a national speaker, an activist, an abuse prevention expert. And I've kind of had the opportunity to check out a number of YouTube clips that you've had, hearing what you're kind of the platform you're using, and this month you've been real busy in terms of being in high schools and colleges, right? You've been super busy. So we talk about
almost
this
every day,
which is spectacular and phenomenal. High schools, colleges. So we talk about, when it comes to sexual assault awareness and you being an abuse prevention expert, can you explain exactly, and I know there's a personal connection here, what kind of brought your heart to this place and talking to so many people about a topic that is so sorely needed to be discussed?
Yeah, so it's definitely not a career or a path that I certainly set out or chose to enter into. But for me, it really was born out of my hardships and my struggles. And as a survivor myself, back when I was about 20 years old, part of my healing included me volunteering at a local women's shelter, trying to get involved in advocacy opportunities. And while doing that, somebody actually asked me if I would share my story. And I remember when somebody asked me to speak, I was terrified. I hadn't even told my family, my friends. It was just kind of something I was dealing with on my own. But I made the decision to be brave and to courageously tell my story at this event. And I wrote it out on like 10 pieces of paper, and I was shaking and reading every word. But the second I was done telling my story, members of the audience came up to me and they shared their stories of abuse. And then they were asking if I would speak at local after-school programs and local schools. And I just realized the power of simply shining a spotlight on this issue, simply by talking openly about it. And so for me, telling my story has helped validate the experiences of others. I think had I heard a story like my own, I might have self-identified much sooner. And so I've kind of just, this has been my soapbox cause ever since. I started volunteering my time to make a dent and make a change. Eventually, I studied the justice system, worked in the field of victim services and advocacy, and now I'm just kind of taking my own spin on it and trying to do some really big prevention work on a daily basis.
Yeah, and you're doing some spectacular things. If you don't mind me asking, can you kind of share with the audience what your story is and the fact that you are a survivor?
Sure. So for me, I first experienced abuse, unfortunately, at the age of 14. It was my very first boyfriend. I was very innocent, young, naive, had never dated anyone prior to that. My parents never talked to me about dating. They probably didn't think I was dating at 14 years old. But I entered into this first relationship and everything seemed fine. until our first date, when he essentially sexually pressured me into doing things that I was not comfortable doing because I was young and scared and didn't really know how to stand up for myself or speak up for myself. I just kind of fell victim to the coercion and to the pressure, and I eventually gave in. And that relationship continued on for my freshman and sophomore year of high school. And it was this on again, off again of him being kind and sweet, and then this other side of him where he was very controlling and aggressive. And I ended up enduring severe verbal, emotional, and sexual abuse for almost my first 2 years of high school. And because of that, and because I wasn't telling anyone, and I certainly didn't feel comfortable talking to my parents or teacher or an adult about these very personal things, I kept it all bottled up. And at a very young age, I developed self-esteem issues, depression. I was self-harming and cutting. I was drinking at a young age to cope with the stress and the self-esteem issues. And my grades were dropping, and high school just became extremely challenging. And when I graduated high school and me and that boyfriend had split up, I remembered thinking when I went into college that now I knew exactly what to look out for. And, you don't date someone that pressures you to do certain things or calls you names or spreads, rumors about you or shares personal information. And so when I went into college, I thought I had a pretty good grip on what abuse was and what to look out for. But unfortunately for me, I fell victim to another abusive relationship in college. And that was classic dating violence, domestic violence, which I still did not fully understand. It's a much more difficult experience because when you date someone who's abusive, they are very kind in the beginning, very sweet, caring, loving, they're charming. You fall in love with them, you invest in a relationship with them, and then over time, the little signs of control and abuse start to pop up in the relationship. And before I knew it, I had been with that boyfriend for 2 years, and he completely isolated me from my family, my friends, was very controlling, very possessive, had uncontrollable mood swings, was very physically aggressive, forced me to drop out of college, and just kind of turned my entire life upside down. So all said and done, I unfortunately only was able to break up with him after he severely attacked me one night. And I had to go through the court process and get a restraining order and do all of that. But I kind of, in that moment, looked back at everything I'd thrown away, all of myself that I had lost, how my life had just kind of fallen apart. And I was only 20 years old. And I was so determined in that moment to, one, put all the pieces back together and not continue to be a victim, but instead to make sure that I won for once, that I could survive and thrive and achieve something for myself, and also to give back to other victims, because I suddenly realized how common my situation was of falling in love with someone, thinking they're great, thinking that your situation is different or unique or like no one will understand. But once I've started opening up and sharing my story, people, we all share the exact same story. It's textbook, but we don't talk about this stuff enough. That's why nobody thinks that they're going through it.
Well, and I know, first of all, thank you for sharing something that's extremely personal. And you are a survivor. And reading, one of the statistics you had on your website of being, within that age group, sexual assault and volatile relationships are as high as 1 in 3. I mean, if you contemplate, that's a crazy number, and it's something, if it's this prevalent, how we need to talk about it, and what it, as a counselor, how that's such an important thing to be able to be connected and talk to somebody, and how so many people like you, who didn't feel like they did have that ability to open up, because it's scary. It's very scary. What was it? So that you left the courtroom, was that kind of like your light bulb moment?
It was, it was a really interesting, out of body experience for me. I felt defeated. I definitely was at rock bottom in my life. I had no idea what my next step was going to be. I didn't have anywhere to go. I couldn't go back to my apartment because that was unsafe. My parents still weren't talking to me. And I left the courthouse, and I had this moment where I sat down in my car and I looked at the seat next to me and it was entirely empty. And it was such a profound moment because it was the first time in over 2 years that my abusive boyfriend hadn't been sitting right by my side, dictating how I would spend the next minute of my life. And I felt so free in that moment. I remember thinking like, wow, I can go buy an iced coffee and not get yelled at, or I can put on my favorite song in the car and just take a longer drive home and not get in trouble or not have to face accusations when I get to the door. And I just felt so free. And I started to think about all I'd thrown away, the fact that I dropped out of college, the fact that I'd missed out on all these opportunities. And really, for me, it suddenly hit me that I hadn't been doing anything for myself all the way back to when I was 14 years old and that first incident happened. So yeah, it was definitely a life-changing moment for me. I was just kind of fed up at that point. I was over it. I let it all go, let all the baggage go and just decided to start moving forward as best I could.
Yeah. And you've really been such a voice when it comes to talking about especially sexual assault, unhealthy relationships. And I think, to anyone listening now, that whether they're a parent or there's somebody that might be in an unhealthy relationship, if you were to say, what are some red flags that you would say, you are not in a healthy relationship? There are red flags that are going off that are saying, you know what, we can make excuses for people, but when our gut and our heart are saying things, what are those few things that you would say, you know what, this is absolutely the definition of an unhealthy, volatile relationship?
Yeah, so I think a big red flag is simply noticing that it's always one person in the relationship that seems to be instigating and initiating arguments, disagreements. It's definitely a one-sided issue. And a big red flag is when incidents happen, there's an apology, but then it's just a matter of time before that same type of incident happens again. When you are with somebody who's abusive, abuse is fueled by a need for power and control. So essentially, everything that your partner does in some way impacts how you feel, how you act, how you think. They seem to have some kind of hold on every aspect of your life. So, whether you can see your friends that day without upsetting them, whether somebody can comment on one of your, social media posts without them getting mad and questioning who that is. It just starts to infiltrate your thoughts to the point where everything you do and every aspect of your life has to get filtered through how it will impact the person that you're dating. Mm-hmm. So I think when you get to that point, when you start to feel smothered, like you just have to walk on eggshells to not upset them, that's a major red flag.
And you said with would you say both of the relationships, or at least the second one when you were in college, really was kind of a honeymoon period where everything seemed perfect, charming, luring you in. And then, when your heart is invested, things change. And I would say that person was aware of the change, but this is where manipulation comes in, and this is where a toxic relationship is evident. But would you say that it kind of plays mind games with you, that like, I love this person, but kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. No one is abusive on the first date or the second date. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in a relationship with that person. So yeah, you get invested, you develop loving feelings for someone, the abuse shows up later. But the thing is, there is a cycle in every abusive relationship where you're in this honeymoon phase in the beginning, everything's great. But then there's like this tension building, and then there's some big outburst or some big incident or some big argument. They apologize, and then you are right back to that honeymoon phase. So it becomes very confusing because you might have this huge argument, but then the next day they seem like their old self again. They're kind, they're polite, they're the person that you fell in love with. You think, great, we're back to normal, but then it's just a matter of time before this repeats. So, a lot of people that haven't been in these relationships, they think, well, why would you stay with somebody if it's that awful? Well, it's not bad all of the time, and that's the mind game that goes on. Some days they're loving and perfect, and you just pray that if you can get through your challenges and help them through their issues, that eventually it will all be good days. But unfortunately, the majority of the cases, abuse just gets worse, and it's very hard for somebody who's abusive to change, and it's not something that you can do for them.
Right. But also, you had mentioned when you had come out of court, you were sitting in your car and you looked to the passenger seat, and that realization for really the duration of your relationship, it was all about him essentially, right? And self-care was absolutely put on the back burner. So in terms of also being a toxic relationship, if it's all about that other person, that's, to me, that's an absolute red flag. That's toxic. If self-care, which we all need, it's absolutely essential for us as individuals, but also within a relationship, is something that's neglected and something that you were really deprived from, we can't be healthy.
Absolutely. And, we fail to realize that. So we do a really good job of talking about things like depression and substance abuse and addiction and suicide, but we often fail to connect unhealthy dating relationships as a root cause of a lot of these problems, especially among young people. An unhealthy dating relationship, or if somebody's been, God forbid, sexually assaulted, that often leads to depression, self-esteem issues, anxiety, PTSD, suicidal ideations, substance abuse, addiction. I mean, it's all interconnected. So yeah, not only is it a lack of self-care, but you personally become severely at risk for a lot of other consequences, short-term and long-term.
But in particular, when we talk about high school and college students who might feel like, I want to talk, but I don't feel like there's anyone to talk to. I know you do a whole lot of presentations, and sometimes kids can feel like, oh my gosh, you know what? I don't know if I can ever tell this to my mom, even though mom would be willing to hear, but it's some of the worst news you could ever get. What kind of options, what resources, can we throw out to our young people to say that, you know what, if you're ready to talk, this is where we can kind of guide you?
Yeah. So especially when we're talking about younger people, when I go into schools and I speak, I always encourage these students to open up and talk to someone, because I believe one of my biggest mistakes was keeping it bottled up and thinking that I could manage it myself. I wasn't able to see the devastating impact this had on me by not seeking help from someone. So I think I would encourage everyone to open up and talk to someone. There's a lot of reasons that a teenager or a student or someone younger might not want to talk to their parents, might not want to tell a teacher. For me, I wasn't supposed to be dating. So I certainly was afraid that, if I opened up and said what happened, now I'd get in trouble because I broke rules and I wasn't supposed to be out on this date. So, and honestly, it's yucky personal stuff. You don't want to talk to your parents about it or a random teacher. But a lot of people fail to realize that there are so many free resources. Every single community has a free agency, where you can get free counseling, or there's hotlines that are anonymous. I'm always reminding teens that if they're afraid they're going to get in trouble or that they're going to trigger a report by talking to someone at school, it shouldn't be a reason for them not to talk to anyone at all. And so there's teen crisis text lines, there's teen dating violence and sexual abuse hotlines where they can simply just talk to someone when they're in a time of need, when they're having an anxiety attack, when they feel like self-harming. There's people they can always reach out to and talk to. So I think the community resources and the internet resources are huge. And I think more people should be aware of them and hopefully using them.
Yeah. I think the anonymous hotlines for a lot of young people kind of are given green light where, I can get this off my chest and can receive some advice without necessarily having the attachment of, coming forward to everybody, but beginning the healing process. And I think as human beings, when we've gone through any kind of trauma, it's finding the way that fits you, just like you kind of mentioned before, to begin healing. Whether that's, and I do think self-care is a part of that. Not everybody wants to talk about what happened. I absolutely agree with that. But I do think where it's infusing ways of healing through self-care, whether that's, it's counseling, or whether it's, going to the gym, or it's going to an art class or a pottery class, whatever it is, that it's finding ways to begin to allow yourself to heal. Because I do think when we can, not necessarily putting a lid on it isn't always the case, but it can come out in other ways when we talk, getting depressed or bouts of anxiety, or I feel this way for so long. Of course, I'm going to pop pills or I'm going to drink because we don't like to feel that way. So finding ways, whether this is you're a parent listening, you're a teacher, you're a college student, when we hurt, we all need to find ways to kind of get our path in terms of healing. Because if we don't, it just beats the heck out of us. And what I love about, the phrase you use and the phrase I've used is you're a survivor. When you're a victim of something, we talk about the path of becoming a survivor. And I'll say, like, listening to you and hearing, different people I've talked to over the years, that some of the really most dynamic, effective human beings have been through so much, who have chosen to funnel that to really change the world. And I think when we kind of relay that to young people, old people, whoever it is who've been through trauma, I think we put a different spin on it. That it's, we can funnel. It doesn't mean you have to be up and speaking in front of people. It can, but what are you going to funnel and allowing it to be part of your healing process? I think is an important thing to kind of convey, and you're doing that.
Yeah. I mean, I always close most of my presentations by saying, for me, disadvantage has been one of my greatest advantages in life, because it's taught me to be determined, driven, have more to fight for, realize that life is short, that opportunities are fleeting, and it teaches you to be resilient. And for me, I've been able to discover who I really am out of all of this, because, I was lost and now I'm found. And, it's been an amazing personal journey for me. So absolutely, whatever your challenges in life, you can use it to grow. It can be a stepping stone, and it can be a catalyst to a much better life if you are willing to look at it that way. Right.
Absolutely. If you're willing to look at it that way. And I know that can take, whether it's a short window of time or an extended period of time, everybody's different. But I do, I love that it's, taking that as it's a part, it doesn't define you. It's a part of you, but using that to really, to change lives. And I do, whether I'm talking with a young person or somebody who's been, in the mental health field, that life is really, really fleeting. Life is very short. Bad things happen to us that we can't always explain, and man, it can beat the heck out of you emotionally, physically, spiritually. But I do believe in all things that it's mindset. I really, really do. And it's easier to say, in the moment, but fighting for yourself and fighting for the fact that we are not in this alone, and that it is, so many hearts, so many young people, when you're, speaking to these audiences, Ashley, that have, when you say almost 1 in 3 have been affected, and that can feel that connection, and some who will come and talk to you, and others who might never talk to you, but you know what? They're on Google that night looking up a hotline number. And so this is what seeking help and seeking more than where they're at. And that is what we need to keep dialoguing. And we, still have half of April left, but we have 12 months in a year where this happens, right? And so it's not being limited just to an awareness month, but continuing to talk. And as we wind down, is there anything you kind of would like to leave with our listeners?
Well, I think, I've been doing this work for a long time, and I really feel like we are on the cusp of impacting real change. We're seeing it with the Me Too movement. All it takes is enough voices casting a shameful light on these issues where we start to, tolerate it less, and it serves as a deterrent. So I think just keep talking about it. Anyone out there who, has a young person, I hear time and time again that parents talk to their kids about safe sex and some of the more obvious common things, but talk to them about healthy qualities in a relationship. And if they're dating, check in with them, even if you think they're not dating. I mean, I spoke to some 5th graders yesterday, and apparently the 5th graders are dating. So start early, talk to them about relationships, and just make sure that reinforce the messages that if they ever feel badly about anything, they can come and talk to you. Because I do wish I would have opened up, and that's probably one of the biggest mistakes I made. So reinforcing that they can come to you if something's wrong.
Yeah, the link to communication is big time. I want to say thank you. If anyone, you're listening and you want to get some more information about Ashley, I'd encourage you to hop on ashleybendiksen.com. I have the link, will be in the notes. please check it out. If you are, a school, college, and you're looking for a speaker, check her out. She is a rock star, doing some wonderful, wonderful things. Ashley, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here today, being you today, and to my listeners, peace, love, and goodness, my friends.
If you enjoyed today's show, I encourage you to visit goodnesschick.com and sign up for my newsletter, providing insights and encouragement just for you. Thanks for listening, my friends.